Future Hacker. Life. Path. Future.
Welcome back, everybody. This is the second episode with Jose Serna. And now it's time to talk about the future of food, which is super exciting, right, Jose? When talking about future of food, we already covered plant-based foods, lab-based meat, protein sources, but we never really got to powder, which is apparently another trend. Is that right? Let's begin by that.
Okay. Hi again, everyone. So thanks, Maria. So basically, for me, the future of food is more sustainable, or it won't be. Then I would say future of food is powder. And there are some facts that can support this, right? So 40% of the food in the world is in powder form, whether it is B2B, reconstituted as an ingredient, or B2C as an infant formula, supplement, personalized nutrition, instant mixes, coffee capsules, whatever, right? So the difference mainly is in dissolving it in an industry or at home. So you can transform into powder any kind of fresh food, whether if it's meat, plants, grains, etc. And food powder, it's been with us from the beginning of the civilization, talking about the flour or any other food powder form. So it is safer, it is cheaper, it has more than 2 years shelf life. Sometimes it's restricted by the regulation. It has more traceability and more efficient quality control. So you can actually guarantee that what you are consuming is what it's expected to be. So it also provides access to industrialized other edible parts of fresh produce than otherwise would be wasted. So there are many multiple angles that we can explore on the food powder that probably they are mostly unknown by the audience. Talking about the food landscape, so there are some areas that never change in the food industry, right? So let's say there are 100 food companies in the world that produce around 20% of the food that accounts for around 50% of the total value of the food we consume. And the remaining 80%, it's produced by 500 million SMEs. So a small, medium enterprise, right? And a fraction of these small, medium enterprise, family companies mostly, and startups, they are transforming the food system. And for first time, they are becoming unicorns. They are becoming unicorns in only a few years of activity. So many of them are in the delivery, or they are marketplaces, but there are also companies producing meal kits. There are companies that are into food science or ingredients or different formulations or different sources of proteins, and they are addressing the future of food. For example, Just, probably Just, or Oatly or Notco or Kava, but there are many others in China like Genki Forest in the beverages, or Weilong that is producing noodles, and of course Impossible Foods, Beyond Burger, and so on and so forth. Some companies that I mentioned to you in the previous session, some of them are here, right? So, for example, in the delivery and in the cloud kitchen space, we have Hitopi that became a unicorn in the UAE. And then there are many startups playing some role in the food system. So regarding Blend Hub, that is the company that I told you about, for me, with the impact as a driving force and the platform philosophy as a tactic, I decided to join this purpose-driven organization, and I will be the managing director for the Middle East. So basically, my role would be to expand this first food as a service manufacturing platform in the world. We aims to make food available in more just and safer way to more people in more places. So I think it's important to get to know more about what we eat, to get to know about new sources of food, and I make that choice.
It sounds so exciting, Jose. And you know what? Every time we talk about food tech, there's so much to explore. It's just never ending, right? I have some questions regarding going back to the powder piece. Actually, you were the first one to tell me about that. And I'm curious. For me, it's really clear how it's going to help when we talk about food waste. I can't imagine how much food we're wasting that is not really edible and that could be used somehow in the powder form, right? But what about when it comes to turning the fresh food into powder? Regarding the nutritious value, can we actually keep it? How is this loss? And how do you think the public is going to receive that?
Well, absolutely. I mean, there are two components there, right? So education is very important. So we have to be educated to be more aware about these sources of food and what does it mean in terms of nutritional values. So basically, any powder need to be dried first, right? So the fresh produce, the fresh meat, the fresh vegetables, whatever it's going to be converted into powder, it has to be dried. And then today with technology, typically it's a lyophilization or freeze drying processes that preserves all the nutritional values or most of them, right? Especially vitamins and so on. So yeah, that's the case.
All about education. And so still about education. So we know, as you mentioned, most of the food system, the food chain, we're involving small families and farmers. And I think I read on UN side that it's mostly women actually when it comes to the other point, right, in producing. On the same time, and I think we mentioned in the first episode that you can't talk about a sustainable future of food without having the technology involved. Do you think we're going to be able to be educating those small families and farmers into this process so they can still be up to date? Or do you think that's not even necessary because they're just on the other side, they're working on generating the food and all the rest will happen in the end of the cycle?
Well, thanks for your question, Maria, and I totally agree. It's a way to empower women, especially in the most disadvantaged countries, right? Regarding technology adoption of these small farmers and so on, I think this is happening already. So, for example, I advised a company that is in the agri-tech space called Plantae from Spain. So it's one of the main barriers that they were finding when marketing their services, their solutions, is exactly that resistance from the farmers that are less, I would say, proactive when adopting these new technologies, right? But the moment they see the solution working and the moment they see some impact, for example, in the water that they use, right, for irrigation, they have some savings on it, or they reduce the use of certain fertilizers and obviously impacting in their cost and not necessarily related to the cost, but to the quality and to monitoring some of their consumptions, right? And reducing their carbon footprint, right? So there are so many metrics that now can be measured on real time through IoT sensors, for example. And this is happening. So the next revolution in the agri-tech space will come from the adoption, especially on the open farming of these technologies. Because vertical farming and so on, they are already in that mode, right? So they are already built based on technology. But these other traditional farming methods, they are the real challenge. But it's happening. That transition, it's already happening.
That's great. That's great. So let's have a slight change of topic here. In one of your articles on LinkedIn, you mentioned that Ukraine could feed the world. It alone has 42 million hectares of agricultural land. Let's talk about then the impact of the war, right? Considering Ukraine as a producer and Russia and as an importer. It was a very interesting conversation we had in our intro call. I'd love to cover that.
Yeah, well, it's very unfortunate the situation that is happening there, right? So, and a very sensitive topic. But talking about the numbers and the impact, right? It's true. I mean, it's 42 million hectares of agricultural land. That means 70% of the country's surface it's dedicated to agriculture, right? So imagine in such a big country like Ukraine in the middle of Europe, and then strategically located because the location is also very, very strategic to serve different geographies. So to put other numbers in perspective, I mean, more than 25% of the world's reserves of the called Chernozem, which is basically the fertile soil or the most fertile soil, the black soil in the world. 25% of the world reserves are there, right? So it's amazing, these numbers, because that it's answering some of the hyperinflation that we are having in products like the sunflower oil. So, for example, it's the largest world producer of sunflower seed and sunflower oil. And then it's the top 10 producer of other agricultural products like corn, barley, rapeseed, wheat, and even soybean. So it's amazing the impact of that event in the rest of the world in a context that was already very challenging because of the COVID. So if you add Russia to the picture, I mean, Russia is also a very relevant producer of some agricultural commodities, but it's especially one of the biggest exporters of the three major groups of fertilizers that are nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium. And also to give you some perspective on it, many farmers around the world, they are having problems to access to their fertilizers. So their crops, they are preparing their crops now. Their crops are threatened because of this, because they cannot go to the market and replace what they were importing from Russia. So it could create really a big crisis, and this hyperinflation could be aggravated. So then, apart from other considerations, I said a war settles nothing, and it never brings a lasting peace, but lasting death. And this is what we are seeing, right? And what we will see in the future. So for me, in terms of the food system, it's definitely been aggravated substantially because of these facts. So the situation was already very, very difficult, and the food supply chain was not even recovered, not even partially, from the pandemic effects. So, I mean, unfortunately, I see a forecast of more inflation in certain products.
It's really tough. And I don't think people realize that, and they have this type of information. It's not something that you usually will see in the news, right?
Yeah, this is a very good point. And again, the solutions to these challenges will come from education, consumer awareness, but also technology and innovation. So we have to be able to prevent this reliance on certain sources, right? And I totally agree with you. So in the media, there is a responsibility of educating and disseminating knowledge besides some of these, more, let's say, sensationalist news.
Exactly. So now let's have a complete change in topic, and let's go to a brighter note, right, Jose? So, as we mentioned in the first episode, you've been living in Dubai for more than 12 years, right? Is that right?
Yes.
I'd love to know, how's the experience of being an entrepreneur there? We already covered in China, a little bit of Japan, Singapore, and UAE. There's so much happening out there.
Yeah, well, actually, this week I read that the United Arab Emirates was positioned the first in a rank of the best places where to become an entrepreneur or to launch a company, right? But definitely, I mean, there is a lot of progress in that side. I think the government and the society both very much committed to have the UAE and its multiculturality to create a very powerful hub of innovation. So I can say that in addition to the existing and continuously evolving ecosystem, which is young yet, but it's evolving, there are multiple accelerators like Founder Institute for Silicon Valley, where I am also venture partner, and local accelerators like Inc5 that was pioneer and also involved in the steering committee, or Hub 71, which is in Abu Dhabi. So there are many other new initiatives being launched, like different summits that happen during Expo, and they will have continuity. So I'm talking about the Food for Future Summit, which is backed by the Ministry of Climate Change and Environment, or the Future Food, and then the Food Tech Valley that was recently announced, and it's going to be a cluster focusing in food tech and based in Dubai. But it's not only in the UAE, because in Saudi, for example, I'm pretty sure that you are aware about NEOM, This is a city that is going to be in the eastern province, and it's going to have a food sector. It's also very much futuristic and willing to create a sustainable environment in all the aspects.
It's supposed to be powered 100% by renewable energy, right?
Yeah, among other things, right? But yeah,
Yeah.
definitely. And then when we talk about food, we have to talk also about water because food is mostly about water. You know, it's accounting actually of 70% of the fresh water consumption globally. It's in the agriculture or in the food production, right? So on average, I don't know if you were aware, but to produce 1 calorie, we use approximately 1 liter of water, right? But and this is
Really? Oh
true.
my God.
Yeah, this is true for some products, but for some products, it's actually the ratio is terrible, right? Against the water. So we can say actually that water also feeds the world. In the UAE alone, we have some examples of food tech like Irego that I mentioned that it's in the food waste distribution or food loss, right? Fighting the food loss. We have Kitopi that I also mentioned. There are many marketplaces, but there are also local agtech companies like Pure Harvest that is becoming very relevant in the region. It's expanding to Saudi now. Or we have Red Sea Farms that is solving some problems related to the water scarcity. For example, Red Sea Farms develop different varieties that can be irrigated partially with seawater, right? With the salinity of the seawater, right? So imagine. So, and then we have Emirates Biofarm that I mentioned also in the previous session. This is probably more traditional, but it's an example of adopting these disruptive technologies of IoT sensors and so on to improve their efficiencies while not compromising the sustainability aspect, right? But the opposite, actually. So there are also different institutions that are promoting and developing more efficient use of the resources. Like I am also very much connected with the UAE Food and Beverage Association, Manufacturing Association, which is very committed to enhance all these aspects. And ICBA, which is the International Center of Biosaline, it's also backed by the Ministry of Climate Change and Environment that I mentioned. So we are definitely seeing an acceleration and increasing efforts and investment allocated to these spaces.
And probably you saw also a lot of that on all the events. And you had recently Expo Dubai. You now have the Museum of the Future, which looks amazing. They're doing so much more. You've been there, you're not only being there, but you also took part of it, right? Any highlights you'd like to give us before we end this episode?
Yeah, for sure. So yeah, Expo was very busy time. So it's very sad to look backwards and see that it's over now. But I think it was a record one because it represented 192 countries for first time, which is all the countries in the world. It's the first one that happened in a Muslim country, the first one that happened in the Middle East, and it has received over 22 million people in a pandemic context, but also with all the health related warranties, with all the travel restrictions and so on. And they were able to move 22 million people. Can you imagine? So then it was an amazing platform to present some of these, let's say, initiatives, right? So it was focusing mobility, in sustainability, and opportunity. And then with these three axes, I think it was an incredible, as I said, an incredible platform to disseminate knowledge and to disseminate innovation. So regarding the Museum of the Future, I was visiting. Actually, I was one of the early visitors. It's an amazing building. It's really iconic. It's part of the Dubai strategy to have these iconic buildings and these iconic symbols. And then this in particular is in the Dubai Future District, which is by Emirate Towers, close to the Dubai World Trade Center. It's in the main road, which is Sheikh Zayed Road. So it's surrounded by skyscrapers. It's about how the future is likely to be for humanity, right? It's also an initiative to disseminate technological advances and scientific knowledge, and also to bring all these aspects closer to the people, right? So it's also fostering areas like the future of cities, the future of society, the life on Earth, but also the space exploration and colonization, let's call it by its name. So you've seen some of the latest technology in augmented reality, in human-machine interaction, big data analysis, artificial intelligence. So basically, when you enter there, I mean, besides the building itself, that is amazing, all the common areas inside the building are also really, I would say, inspiring and oriented to the future, right? So you can see some balloons, elements flying around, self-propelled. And then you will see in different stages, you will see or you will have different experiences. So it's been designed for you to interact with the building and with all these technologies. And one curiosity is that you have seen that there are Arabic characters around the building, right? Or in the building.
Yeah.
So these characters are a quote from Sheikh Mohammed bin Rashid Al Maktoum, which is the ruler of Dubai and the vice prime minister of the UAE, of the United Arab Emirates. And it says that we won't live for hundreds of years, but we can create something that will last for hundreds of years. So yeah,
nice.
it gives you an idea of the vision, right, behind.
Yeah. Jose, it was so lovely to have you with us today. A lot of interesting content. Thank you so much. It was a real pleasure. And, I'm pretty sure that in a couple of months, you'll have so many news for us. You'll be always welcome here.
Thank you very much, Maria. I want to have a final take on this.
Yes.
And for me, I think it's relevant also to communicate some of these ideas, right? So I think when talking about the food and the water global challenges, it's not only about identifying a new standards or invest on these standards, right? Once you identify, I think it's a part of a journey. It's a transition with room for many technologies. So many different technologies has to coexist,
Definitely.
has to be combined, and these alternatives has to be combined actually to relieve the pressure on the traditional sources of food, right? So it's not plant-based alternative or culture meat or, it's about a combination of all these efforts and then education to adopt some of them, right? Partially at least.
Exactly. A lot of exciting things to be explored still. And I hope, this podcast will inspire a lot of people, a lot of entrepreneurs, and even big companies to be venturing more, right? Thank you so much, Jose.
Thank you.
Future Hacker. Life. Path. Future.